let me start with the origin as a German philosopher. So obviously I grew up in Germany, as you can see from the flag and also probably hear from my accent. And so something what you probably might first ask is, what is philosophy? So this is something what I asked myself as a high school student, what is philosophy? But I didn't know at the time why I was interested, but it just somehow was very interesting for me, very appealing. I probably had good teachers, and it really pulled me into philosophy, and that was basically the first time in my whole high school life that I really got interested into something. So then you might say, you know, philosophy is basically, in the narrow sense of the term, is a very Western thing which originated in old Greece 3,000 years ago, and people were basically thinking, and you probably know some of the names: Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. Socrates was actually a very interesting person. He went on the marketplace and involved people in sort of, if you want to say it like this, strange conversations. So, what is philosophy about? There are probably as many definitions of philosophy as there are philosophers. So that tells you, you cannot really say, okay, this is an apple. It's much easier to say than this is philosophy. So there's a lot of discussion. So what I want to give you is a particular perspective, what is important for me in philosophy. And this is what I indicated here. Thinking about man. So what are we? Who are we? And what can we know about ourselves and the world? So this is already, for specialists among you, this already covers two different branches of questions. What are we? So this is a lifelong question that already the old Egyptians and other ancient culture asked themselves. And this is also today a question which we continuously asking ourselves, particularly with regard to all the progress we make in the sciences. The question becomes even more acute: who are we? And you will see I will pick that question up. But then, of course, and that's already a philosophical reflection, you think, can we really know this question? Can we really address this question? So when you see the apple, when you say this is an apple, you're sure I can know, I have the abilities to know that this is an apple and to taste whether this is an apple or not. Maybe it's just fake. Maybe it just isn't plastic apple. Yeah? But in this question, who are we? There's maybe we really have to ask, do we really have the ability to ask this question? We can ask this question. Yes, we have that ability, but maybe we do not have the ability to answer that question. And that's already sort of a philosophical thought for the insiders of you, sort of an epistemological question concerns knowledge. So these are the questions which sort of you philosophize or you think about. Then, of course, you come up, who does the thinking? Yeah? There have been, in the history of philosophy, many answers to that. And one of the main answers was provided by Rene Descartes, a French philosopher in the 16th, 7th century. Actually, he was not only in French, he traveled to Sweden, to Germany at the time. There were no nations in Europe. So the boundaries were somehow free. So who does this thinking? Is it just our body? Is it our brain? Or is it some mind? Or some people might even say, is it some inspiration which we receive from the upper layers of our universe? So, meaning a God. Maybe God implanted some kind of thoughts in our head, and so basically who is thinking is ultimately God. That was the answer given in the medieval ages by, for instance, Thomas Aquinas. But then the science came about, Copernicus came about, and sort of more weight and autonomy was given to the human. And Descartes assumed, yes, the body is important, the brain is important, but even more important for the ability to think and to have consciousness and to have a sense of self, knowing who you are and knowing who you are not. That's the mind. And the mind is connected with the brain, mediated by a little gland, the pineal gland. It's a tiny little gland somewhere in our brain. So basically what he said, my mind, including its consciousness, thinks, whereas my body, including my brain, just obeys the mind. So basically, the body and the brain were just considered as pure machines, like an automaton, like a car, which has to have a driver because otherwise the car doesn't move. Whereas the mind is the driver. Yeah? So, and of course, I'm sure that the mind enjoys particularly the German highways where they can have a lot of speed. Yeah? Whereas here it's, yeah? So, then of course, next question comes, and more scientific progress was made. Is the mind different from the body and its brain? To be honest, we do not know. This is the state of the art. And the question is, as a philosopher, of course, I'm raising this question, can we know this at all? And are we able to address the question whether the mind is nothing but the brain? So this, or do we suffer from a blind spot in the knowledge and cognition of ourselves and our brain? So you can see already, it's always intertwined, the question for the what are we, what is the brain, what is the mind, is always connected with the question, are we really able to do so? And I think these questions always need to be coupled. It's very important because otherwise you might come to conclusions which you may not really be able to draw because it's beyond your capacities, and humans like to go beyond their own capacities. So this is what we can do. Yeah? So this is basically my starting point. So how can we connect mind and brain and phenomena like consciousness and self link to the brain? And now what I want to do I want to introduce a little bit of my earlier research. And I started that with a particular phenomenon, which was right at the cross points between mind and brain, or body, better to speak so. So at least I thought at the time. So what we can do to solve this question, we can observe, we can think, and we can empirically investigate. And I try to do all three. So this is the phenomenon I was talking about, catatonia. It's a very strange disease, very severe, and people who have that is often associated with schizophrenia. It can also occur in depression, but usually it's more often in schizophrenia. Fortunately, the frequency of that phenomenon has considerably decreased since 30, 40 years. Before, it was much more often. These people were completely mute. And even worse, they postured in certain bizarre positions. Even they hold their arm against their gravity. And in earlier times, this was done not only for minutes, for days, but sometimes for years and decades. I remember I've seen a patient back in Germany at the beginning of my residency who was for 20 years in such a position. Yeah? And we have of course, you cannot communicate with these people. You have no idea what was wrong. And there's apparent, it is not like other neurological disorder where it's clear you have a certain lesion in the brain. So you couldn't find anything. So this is a very bizarre syndrome. And obviously you can see there must be some mental changes which are abnormally transformed into the body, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to speak anymore, and posture in these abnormal positions. Yeah? So if I stand 5 minutes like this, then you know what you have to do. Yeah? So the first thing what we did a very simple approach. We asked these patients, after their acute state, what they experienced. Because one of my central assumptions is that what we subjectively experience, not what a psychiatrist diagnoses in you, but what you subjectively experience must mirror what happens in your brain. So we very simply ask these people afterwards, what did you experience in your acute catatonic state? Some of them had no memory at all. They were completely unaware that they were posturing. But most of them told me that they had extremely strong emotions, which they could not control anymore. I'm well aware that other disorders like schizophrenia or depression, which do not go along with catatonia, also have strong emotions. But the main distinguishing criterion was that they could not control their emotions at all. So basically, a Japanese probably would say it's a tsunami of emotions. Yeah? Yes. So it's a completely overwhelming, and the only way to react to that is shut off completely. Don't speak, don't talk, don't move. Why? Because with every movement and talking, you get more input you have to deal with. And that may exaggerate your anxiety. So what does this now mean? So that's led me to much better understand why they do this. So suddenly these symptoms made somehow sense. They have a subjective meaning. Yeah? They try to reduce the inflow and the anxiety, which overwhelms. What does this mean for the research? This is very simple. You have all the tools already. You know they have strong emotions, so what do? You stimulate them emotionally and see how their brain reacts. Obviously, you can do this only in the state afterwards, in the post-catatonic state, because you don't want to disturb them in that state. I was very fortunate that at my time, the functional imaging was developed. So this is even younger than the neuroscience, functional brain imaging, so that you can basically online see what happens in your brain when you fulfill certain tasks, when you have certain subjective experience. This is called functional brain imaging. And this is a really new technique which was developed at the beginning of the 90s of last century. So this is just 20 years, if at all, old. So it's really just a little baby which does its first steps. That's the stage we are in with functional imaging. So, but it has rapidly developed and has made rapid progress. And here you, for instance, see, these are earlier findings from ours, that these patients do show, here you see the blue bars, show abnormal reaction to emotional stimuli. You see there's a real difference between the healthy subject and the post-acute catatonic patients. And you see here the differences in the activity in a particular region. It's basically like here, when you say, oh God, this is exactly the region called orbitofrontal cortex or medial prefrontal cortex. So then, of course, you want to say yes, but that does not explain me why they have these abnormal emotions, movements. So why do they posture? So they have abnormally intense emotions, but why do they have these abnormal movements? Other people also have strong emotions, but it doesn't transform into posturing and complete immobility. So this is the question we asked then, and then we looked for the connections between that region, you remember here,